Meanwhile, U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan temporarily freezing the criminal proceedings against former President Donald Trump in his 2020 election case. This move could delay the March 4th trial date, Chutkan acknowledging that she doesn't have jurisdiction over the case while it's pending before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed to a request from special counsel Jack Smith last week to quickly rule on Trump's claim of special immunity in this case. Does he have immunity because he was president? The High Court also saying yesterday that it will review whether prosecutors exceeded the scope of a federal obstruction law used in hundreds of January 6th cases, including Smith's prosecution of Trump. Joining me right now is constitutional attorney and member of the Supreme Court Bar, Mark Smith. Mark, thanks very much for being here. We're very interested in hearing your analysis here. Where does this stand? How do you see this?
Well, I think this has been a good week for President Trump. First of all, keep in mind that there is an argument here for presidential immunity. Now, as to whether or not it's going to work, we don't know. But the fact that the Supreme Court is looking at this quite carefully in conjunction with their review of this other case arising out of January 6 prosecutions called the Fisher case, which deals with an interpretation of a statute, 18 U.S.C. 1512. The reason why the fact that these things are going together is probably favorable to President Trump is the Department of Justice has really been overcharging in the views of many of these 1512 cases because they are really trying to take federal statutes that are applicable really to financial crimes and to evidence tampering rules and applying it to these allegedly political protest situations involving January 6th. And yet, I think when they're looking at these things two together, I can see a situation where the Supreme Court is asking themselves whether or not there's overcharging going on here or what exactly is Special Prosecutor Smith doing. So I think overall, this is a positive trend for President Trump. And as to whether or not the Supreme Court is going to hear this presidential immunity case, they have asked for expedited briefing, but that does not guarantee they're going to make a decision on the presidential immunity question right here and right now. They still have the option to send that back to the United States Court of Appeals in D.C. for further proceedings. And if that were to occur, of course, that would likely delay any possible trial in this case even further.
So what do you think? Do you think he should have immunity?
I think it's a close call, and I think it's very difficult. Keep in mind that when the Constitution was adopted in the 18th century, there were not a lot of federal laws out there. Now we literally have thousands and thousands of laws. And what makes, I think, the presidential immunity question tricky here, Maria, is the type of crime that's being alleged. This is not a clear-cut, what's known as malum in se kind of crime, like a murder or something like that. This really is a crime that is tied in arguably to presidential duties. Specifically, the president has duties to make sure that the process of electing the president, officials, federal law is executed properly. So he does have a role in his official capacity as president to make sure that laws are honored. And of course, counting the electoral votes from the Electoral College would be well within the scope of what the government does. Yeah. On the other hand, of course, President Trump was wearing a separate hat on that day on January 6th. That was as a presidential candidate. So really, in this case, where the process touches fingers both with arguably his job as president, his official capacity as president, as well as kind of his role as a presidential candidate, that is a dicey factual question, kind of a mixed question of law and fact that the Supreme Court may have to get into the details of. And that's why I think it's very difficult to predict what the Supreme Court will do here involving President Trump and what happened in and around January 6th and the events leading up to that.
Well, a U.S. appeals court ruled that former President Trump cannot assert presidential immunity in a defamation lawsuit brought by writer E. Jean Carroll. Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, said that they will seek immediate review on the decision from the Supreme Court. Mark, we're following that as well. Does this play into your thinking in any way?
I don't think so, because the ruling out of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in New York City dealing with the Jean Carroll case specifically said that President Trump had waived his presidential immunity defense because he waited too long to assert it. So really, the Second Circuit kind of dodged that bullet in a sense by saying, well, look, you didn't raise it early enough. You needed to waive it, raise it, much earlier than you did. So even if you have a defense, you've waived it. I do also think that because, again, the Jean Carroll situation is really more standalone-ish and doesn't speak directly in any respect to like governmental processes, I think that the presidential immunity argument may be might be stronger when it involves the events of January 6th than it is dealing with civil lawsuits. Keep in mind that you do have the precedent of Paula Jones versus Bill Clinton that spoke to civil prosecutions back in the Bill Clinton era. But of course, in that situation, President Trump, at least according to what's going on in the Jean Carroll case, is saying he's being held accountable for allegedly defamatory statements he made while president. And that's distinguishable from what happened with the Paula Jones case, where Paula Jones allegedly said Bill Clinton did things before he was the president. But still, the Jones case is much more precedential because that is a civil matter, as is the Jean Carroll. And the Jack Smith special prosecution is a criminal matter. So I think the Supreme Court will draw distinctions between those types of cases.
Oh, that makes sense. So, Mark, what are your thoughts now on the timing of all of this? Obviously, Jack Smith wants a trial in March. He wants to get this over with way before the election. But we're in election territory. We are so close to the Iowa caucuses at this point. 300 plus days until the election. You've got Iowa caucuses January 15th. So what are your thoughts on the timing of this? Will Trump have trials before the election? Will it impede his ability to actually be a nominee?
I think it's all going to turn on what the United States Supreme Court does in the next couple of weeks. If they send the presidential immunity question back to the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, Maria, then I think the odds of there being a trial in 2024 will be slim. If the Supreme Court decides to go ahead and resolve the presidential immunity question, and of course they resolve it in favor of the government's position that says that he can be prosecuted, I think you could be looking at a trial sometime in the late summer, early fall. So you might have a situation where in the months leading up to the presidential election, that President Trump is actually sitting in a courthouse at trial in the District of Columbia. But keep in mind one thing, I do bring up this Fisher case again, Maria, because this 1512 charge is a big part of the charge against President Trump, dealing with interference with official proceedings. And if the Supreme Court internally thinks they're going to basically throw out this claim against basically the Department of Justice brought against criminal defendants under 1512, that could also influence the Supreme Court's thinking about timing, because that's a very big part of Jack Smith's case against President Trump. And if the Supreme Court knows internally they're going to really throw that out and dismiss it, that could also influence how the Supreme Court views the timing here, because you're not going to want the defendant to have to go through this. You're not going to want the DOJ to have to go through a charge of a claim that ultimately is going to be thrown out by the Supreme Court. So that could also influence the timing and the perspective of the Supreme Court and how they handle this, and whether they send this back down for further proceedings or they just resolve it right here and right now.
All right. It's going to be some few weeks ahead. Mark, will be tapping into your expertise along the way. Thanks very much, Mark Smith, joining us there.